Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome and season's greetings. Happy holidays. I hope whenever you celebrate this time of year that you're having a good season. I think we have safely moved out of pumpkin spice season and into peppermint season, which is always my actual favorite. So that's very exciting. I just found out today that there is a new Ben and Jerry's flavor called Minty Wonderland or Minter Wonderland that I have to go find now. It's a limited time Christmas one. This sounds amazing. Anyway, here we are. Welcome. So we are going to be diving into these WCAG Easy Checks. So we left off last time. We had started working our way through these, and if you missed that stream, it is still available on LinkedIn and YouTube. You can go back and take a look. We went over alt text for images, page titles, heading structures, proper color contrast, skip links, keyboard focus, and language, and programmatically saying what language your page is in or what parts of your page are in. And so we're going to pick up today and work through the rest of these. So we have Zoom, captions, transcripts, audio descriptions, form, and then forms. These last two things are all forms. So we'll take a look at those and how to do those tests and how to work through them. And sorry if you were here again last time, but just a quick review that this is an official document from the Web Accessibility Initiative, which is part of the W3C, right? The W3C is the body that sets standards for the web. And the Web Accessibility Initiative is, like a department, I guess, of that. And then they're the people who create the WCAG guidelines, right? The WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they have some other resources as well. And this is one of them, which is the Easy Checks. And we're in a kind of a weird state with the Easy Checks document in that the currently published version of it is this one that's over here. So if you do a web search, you'll probably get two results. And I just want to quickly kind of explain what they are so that you're not confused. So this version is the old version, and it's the one that's officially published right now. It is still 95% accurate, and will mostly work. It has you use a browser add-on called the Web Developer Add-on, which is a free add-on available for all browsers, and walks you through doing a handful of basic tests. And you can see that the very first thing on the page is it says there's a new version, there's a draft of this updated Easy Checks document. So that's what we're using today. It is still marked as a draft. It has not been officially published. So you should be aware of that, but it's in pretty good shape, right? And we're kind of helping QA it and make sure it's all correct as we're kind of going through it and using the document today. So we're kind of in this weird in between. The old one is really old. And you can tell if you go down and just look at some of the screenshots and things, you can tell how old it is. And there's, as far as I'm aware, because I did use this relatively recently, the only thing that's wrong, if I go back up to the top and look at the list of tests, is this resized text. I think that's the only test on here that's outdated. The other ones actually seem fine. Because even though this document is, I would guess this document is about 10 years old, WCAG hasn't actually changed that much in 10 years. So there's that. So the document isn't too terrible. And I'll tell you exactly what's wrong with this resized text is that if you've been on the web for a long time like me, then you'll probably remember that when you resized text in a browser, it would resize only the text. And it didn't actually zoom in the whole page, right? So if you're on Windows, it's Control plus and minus. If you're on Mac, it's Command plus and minus, right? So if I hit Command plus, you can kind of see it zooms up the whole page, right? We see that back to top button at the lower right getting bigger. We can see that the whole layout and everything changes. And that didn't used to be the case. It used to be just the text would change size, and it would create some interesting challenges. And so this old version is still written assuming that browsers are only going to resize the text and not actually resize the whole screen. And actually, I think Firefox is the only browser left that even has that option, and it's off by default, but you can turn it on so that when you use Command or Control plus or minus, it will only change the text. That is still an option in Firefox, but I think they're the only browser that still has that. So if you want to try these out, just be aware that test is outdated and assumes just the text is going to resize, but it's the only thing that's wrong in that old test. In the new test, let's talk about this. So we're going to start off with Zoom, the exact thing that was wrong in the old one. As I just said, it's Control on Windows, it's Command on Mac, and then the plus sign will zoom in. The minus sign right toward the top right of most keyboards, well, WCAG keyboards anyway, is where you find those keys. And then if you need to reset it, because, sometimes you accidentally do this and you're like, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. And then if you're not sure how to reset it, it's just 0, right? So I would use Command 0 to just reset it back to the default. So you can always get out of it. So according to WCAG, so at level AA anyway, and these easy checks are based on AA, not AAA, we should be able to zoom a page to 200% without having any kind of negative impact on the layout. So we don't have any text or information that's getting cut off. We don't have any text or information that's overlapping and difficult to see, and things like that. So at AA, it is 200%. At AAA, it is 400%. So should be aware of that difference. Here, we're just looking at 200%. And if I Command plus sign, you can see right here on my address bar, it actually tells me how far in I am. So this is 110. So let me go ahead and take this up to 200. So I think it took me about 5 times to get up to 200. And we can see the layout has adjusted. In fact, it looks like it has swapped to the mobile layout, which is what most modern websites will do. They'll just swap to using the mobile layout once you get to a certain level of zoom, because basically you have the same content width, right? You're going to roughly fit the same number of words per line zoomed into 200% as you would if you were, using a little mobile device of some kind. And you just kind of go through the page, make sure everything looks okay, that I can get to all of the content still. I don't see anything overlapping. I don't see anything cut off. I don't see anything that requires horizontal scrolling. That's another thing. There are, of course, some exceptions. For example, if you have a large data table, that would be extremely difficult to navigate if it were linear instead of a table. Then you might want to make an exception for horizontal scrolling being allowed to go through that table. But that's the basic thing that we're looking for. So it's a pretty simple test to do. You just kind of zoom in, scroll through your page, make sure you can get to everything. So we would want to make sure, for example, this zoomed in, can I still open the menu and can I still navigate through the menu and get to everything that's in there? So remember to do things like that, like the content that may be now hidden, make sure that you still have a way to get to it and that you can get to it without using your mouse, right? That it is available to you with just your keyboard. So let me put this back to the default size. And let's see, is there anything in here that I skipped or left out? So it actually just tells us to use the browser resize. So there's no bookmarklet for this one. You don't need it. And then also I think it's good to be aware that obviously anybody can come along and zoom in a page, right? Like maybe you just forgot your reading glasses that day and you just need the text to be a little bit bigger. But we do have another audience that's using a separate tool called a screen magnifier, and it works a little bit differently than this browser zoom in. So I think it's good to just be aware of it. A screen magnifier is generally going to kind of act like a magnifying glass, and it's going to enlarge just a small portion of the screen rather than like you could see when I was resizing the browser window here, the actual window stayed put, right? Like it didn't shift around. It didn't move around, where a screen magnifier, it would, like we would actually see the edges of the window kind of disappear out of the viewport as we focused in on just a few words that were in the middle of the screen, for example. So I think it's good to be aware of that. And that a screen magnifier works a little bit differently than just the browser zoom. If everything looks good with browser zoom, and also when you're testing on a mobile device, of course, you would want to use the pinch zoom, right, to make sure that you're able to enlarge text that way on a mobile device. A shocking number of websites actually have pinch zoom disabled. And that is a real problem because people need to be able to zoom in. They need to be able to make the text larger if they can't see it. And it is really surprising to me how many of them have that undone. And where that happens is in the meta tag in the head section of the HTML document. So there's a meta tag where the author, the coder of the page, can specify some parameters around. They can set a max zoom. They can disable the zoom. So they can use a bunch of different things to kind of control how that behaves. But really just leave it at the default and let people pinch and zoom as they need to. So hello, Alan. Nice to see you here today. So yes, Microsoft definitely ignored the W3C, especially when they made IE6 and then, I don't know, then left us with IE6 for like 10 years and never updated the browser. So that was an interesting time to be a front-end developer. And yeah, so, okay, good. So 200% on your site was good. 400 is, yeah, 400 is a lot. And it can be pretty challenging to get that to work, depending on, it of course depends on your content and the layout that you're using and all of those things. But for the most part, if you have a pretty decent responsive design, Zoom is going to work pretty well for you. And it's actually like extra QA on your responsive design and making sure that that's going to work across different devices. All right. So, and then here's what it's telling us. Make sure all the text is still readable, that we don't have overlapping, right? We don't have things getting hidden behind other things. We don't have stuff getting cut off. And then if it's a horizontal writing system, which if you're using English, obviously it is, then we don't have horizontal scrolling. If it's a vertical writing system, then we don't have vertical scrolling. And then make sure that if anything has collapsed or been hidden, right, like your menu has become a little hamburger icon, make sure that you can still get to those things without a mouse. Or with or without a mouse. Yeah, I guess it should be what I should say there. Make sure that you can get to all of those things when you're zoomed in. And then, of course, some learn more links. So just giving an example of somebody's using assistive technology, and then the actual success criteria 1.4.4 for WCAG that we're testing against here. All right, let's go ahead and move on to captions. So there is kind of a confusing mix-up of captions and subtitles, and sometimes those get used interchangeably. I guess that's especially an American thing to just use those two things interchangeably. They are technically different, where captions are usually to be used for accessibility purposes, and subtitles are usually used for translation purposes, right? So if I'm watching a foreign film that's recorded in another language that I don't understand, I would have English subtitles on the film. So it's not, right. So it's for the purposes of translation and understanding things across languages, but we tend to use them kind of interchangeably. So be aware of that, especially if you're an American and you're talking to people who are not in the US. They might get really confused if you start interchangeably using those two terms, captions and subtitles. All right, we just had to add a clarification to WCAG in plain English on one of our success criteria to clarify, because we were using captions and subtitles interchangeably in our explanations. So here we have a picture here that shows us, well, we actually don't know just from looking at this picture if this is a caption or a subtitle, because we don't know what language this video was recorded in originally, although it looks like the title of the video is in English. So I'm going to guess that this is probably captions. All right. And yes, Alan, that is the correct meta tag that should be there. Initial scale 1. Oh, maximum scale 1. No. So you don't want to have that in there. And user scalable, no. So yes, that's a bad example. Don't use that. And it is shocking to me how many sites have that on it and have the user scalable set to no. I don't know why. I guess they don't want to have to deal with responsive design correctly. Whatever it is. But it is unfortunate. I come across quite a lot of it. I have WordPress plugins that I sell, and I get probably at least 2 or 3 times a month, I would guess. I have somebody who writes in and says, hey, I can't resize this. And when I look, it's because their WordPress theme has user scalable no set in the meta tag in the header. It's not, not my plugin's fault. It's the theme that you're using. And so I guess I don't know. People just are trying to save themselves some headache, I guess, with CSS. Yes, Alan, that's definitely the don't use example with user scalable set to no. Initial scale 1, perfectly fine. But if you just leave off the maximum scale and the user scalable no, then you're good. All right, so captions, of course, are experiencing like a big resurgence in popularity, even among people who do not have any kind of hearing disability. So we find that captions are really helpful for a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances. So I personally use captions all the time, but I am kind of hard of hearing and have a really hard time specifically kind of catching when people talk in a low voice or kind of mumble, or if there's a lot of background noise, right? I can really struggle to understand what people are saying. So captions are really helpful, but of course they're also just helpful if you're trying to watch a video in a noisy environment, or you're on the bus, or you're at a coffee shop or whatever. You don't want to be playing your video out at full volume. So you can use captions and still watch the video and still kind of understand what's happening in the video. They're also really helpful for people who are neurodivergent sometimes, to be able to help them to focus a little bit more, or people who might have information processing issues, where if they're both hearing and seeing the content at the same time, it can be really helpful. And so people with those information processing disorders will sometimes use screen readers, right? Even though they don't have a vision disability, they'll use a screen reader because it is helpful for them to see text and hear it read at the same time. It helps to process that information and to stay focused. So captions are super helpful for a huge amount of people. And I do think, we're at the end of this article already. So I did want to talk about, I think they only touch on it a tiny bit. I do want to talk about quickly the difference between open captions and closed captions, because I think that a lot of people kind of miss that nuance. So open captions, very easy to think about, because especially with TikTok videos and other vertical video formats on social media, whether it's Instagram Reels or any other of the platforms that do that, they're really popular, right? Where we see the text on the screen in fancy typefaces and different colors, right, is actually being printed on the screen. So that is called an open caption, and they're edited directly into the video. And like I said, very popular on some social media platforms right now. And some people find them kind of annoying. And one of the things that is kind of frustrating about them is that as a viewer of that video, you don't have any control over them. So if the typeface is too small for you or it doesn't have enough contrast, there's nothing that you can do about it. So generally what is preferred for accessibility purposes is closed captions. And those are captions that are not edited into the video themselves, right? They're provided as a separate text file that then your media player can process and display the captions at the appropriate time on the screen. And one of the reasons that those closed captions are actually preferred is that now as a viewer, I have a lot of control over those captions, depending on the media player I'm using, of course, but hopefully you're using one that gives you quite a bit of flexibility. You can drag them to a different spot on the video player, right? So most of the time they're toward the bottom, but if you want them to be at the top or on the right, you can just drag them over there. That works on YouTube, for example, by the way. If you've ever been irritated by captions being in your way, just drag and drop them with your mouse somewhere else. I don't think there's a keyboard interaction for that, unfortunately, but that is available for keyboard users. You should also have the option to change the color and the background color and maybe even the typeface of those closed captions so that they work best for you, whatever happens to work best for you. Maybe you prefer white text on a black background, or maybe you prefer the opposite. With a closed caption, because it's just presented from the video maker as plain text, you get a lot of control over how that gets presented to you and a lot of flexibility also. And if we want to talk about non-accessibility uses of captions, closed captions are going to be preferred because they are plain text that is on the page that can be indexed pretty easily by search engines. Whereas if you have open captions, right, they're edited into the video, they're a lot harder for a search engine crawler or an AI crawler or whatever who comes along. It's a lot harder for those, robots to get access to that text. But if it's in a closed caption file, it's just plain text that appears on your page. All right, let's go ahead and move along to transcripts. And I did want to answer a question that we got on YouTube first. So somebody said, what all do you need to be certified as an accessibility tester? Well, it might alarm you to know that in most cases, there is no certification for accessibility testers. Let's talk about the one that is available in the United States. And I can only talk to you about the United States because that's where I live and that's where I know what all the laws and rules are. So the one exception in the United States is that the Department of Homeland Security, I don't know why it's the Department of Homeland Security, but it is, does offer a program called Trusted Tester for Section 508. And there is a program that is for free that you can go on their website and go through the course. I think it's on Moodle, I want to say. It's like an online course on Moodle that you can work through at your own pace. It is a significant chunk of information. It's not something you're going to do in an afternoon or even a day or even a full week. Like, it's probably going to take you a couple of months to get through the course. And then there is a test at the end. And you can become a certified trusted tester for testing government projects against Section 508. For other types of accessibility testing, their name is escaping me right now, the IAAP, the International, or I think it's International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So they offer a handful of certifications, but they are not so far certifications in accessibility testing. So you'll see a lot of people with a CPA-CC or a CPWA or a WAS certification from them, or even an ADS certification from them for documents. And those are certifications that are available in accessibility kind of generally, but they are not specific to accessibility testing. And there's not really much content in the test or in the preparation materials for those tests about accessibility testing in particular. So that's kind of where we are for accessibility testing. The only true certification for testing in the United States anyway is Trusted Tester, which is free to get, but it is quite a lot of work. All right. Let's go on to transcripts. So a transcript, right, if you've ever read a play, like you've read a Shakespeare play or you read Our Town or whatever, right? Like that gives you a good idea of what a transcript looks like. It's pretty similar to how like a script for a play or a TV show or a movie would be written, in that it's going to tell you not just what's being said, but who is saying it. And it's also going to include any relevant other sounds besides speech. So if one of the speakers is laughing or sighing or crying or yelling, like whatever it is, that information is going to be included. And then any relevant background sounds as well. So if there's ominous music playing, or there's a thunderstorm, or someone knocks on the door, right? All of those kinds of sounds are all going to be included in the transcript. And you can have a transcript for a video, or you can have a transcript for an audio file. So if you think about like a podcast episode, for example, an audio only podcast, you could have a transcript that would basically lay out like, you know, host one said this, host two said that, and then host two laughed, etc. So those kinds of things. So here we have an example, right? So it's not just telling me what's being said, but it's telling me who's saying it. And we would want to include descriptive information, not just about sounds that happen. When we're talking about for a video, we would also want to include in the transcript any information that gets communicated visually. So if I had like a podcast recording of a business meeting, for example, and somebody was showing a chart of like, here's our sales history over a period of time, you would want to make sure to summarize what that chart was showing in the transcript, because otherwise someone who can't see the video isn't going to be able to get that visual information. So any relevant information that gets included in an audio file, in the audio soundtrack, you want to make sure that's in the transcript. And then if it's for a video, anything that is communicated in the audio as well as anything that's communicated in the video would need to be included in the transcript, so that reading the transcript is a true replacement for being able to listen to the audio file or watch the video. All right, and we're going to talk about why that's important, right? Because of course we have people who are deaf and people who are blind, but we also have people who are both. And basically captions aren't going to help. Audio description, which we'll get to in a second, I saw that's the next section here, isn't going to help. So a transcript is something that can always be consumed because it can be converted to Braille. It can be converted in a lot of different ways to, you know, when we start with plain text, we can send that to a variety of different assistive technologies so that the person who is consuming that information is able to do so in whatever way works best for them. And so a transcript can be extremely helpful for people who might have trouble otherwise accessing that information. And then we have our Learn More, links out to a few other articles. And then this takes us to WCAG 1.2.8, which is where we hear about providing media alternatives for pre-recorded media. So there are slightly separate WCAG criteria for audio and video if it's live or pre-recorded. So what I'm doing now is live, and so I would have a different set of criteria that I would need to meet for presenting something live than if you have a pre-recorded video, right? Like once this live presentation is done, now it's a pre-recorded video because people can still watch it, but they're watching it back later and it's not actually happening live. So this one is for a pre-recorded that you would want to have a transcript. Obviously, unless somebody is reading word for word a prepared speech, you can't provide a transcript for a live transmission of any kind, because who knows what people are going to say. So the best you can do is to offer captions and or sign language interpretation of a live presentation. And there's no way to really do a transcript, like I said, unless it's, you're presenting a play or you're presenting a speech or something like that, where word for word, it's all, predetermined. People are just going to be reading or performing it as it's written. All right, so audio description. And audio description, I think, is one of the most forgotten accessibility accommodations. And I think to the point that a lot of people aren't even aware that this is something that exists. So when we think about providing captions for a video, like often that is because somebody is watching the video who cannot hear it, right? And we talked about the other cases where, right, there's lots of other reasons that people might want to have captions on, but overall, like, we think that's for somebody who can't hear the video. And we don't always think about like someone who can't see the video and the extra information that they might need to be able to process the information being presented in the video. And that's why we have audio descriptions. So audio descriptions are extra sound that gets added into a video to describe what's happening on the screen. And in case you weren't aware, this is something that you can turn on a lot of modern television broadcasts and live streams. So I think Netflix has it available on most of their videos. You can go in and turn on the audio description. So if you want to see what it's like, you can try it out. YouTube, unfortunately, does not have support for audio descriptions. There has been a group lobbying YouTube to add support for audio descriptions for quite a long time, but so far they haven't. There is a separate project called YouDescribe, which I think is just youdescribe.org, but you should be able to do just a web search for YouDescribe and find that project, where they use the YouTube API to show YouTube videos, and then on their site they have volunteers who come in and provide audio description on top of those videos. So if you're thinking about watching an action film, for example, right, there's a lot of stuff happening really quickly and very visually. And if you were to close your eyes and try to figure out what's happening, and all you hear is crashes and bangs and booms and gunshots and who knows what else, right, is happening. Well, who's like, what's happening, right? Like, what's crashing? Who's shooting? Who's being shot? Who's being kicked? You can't tell just from the sound. And so that's what the audio description is there for, to actually describe what's happening. And also, if you weren't aware, if you actually go out to movie theaters, which I think that's a thing people still do, if you actually go out to movie theaters, you can request an audio description device to use during the film that will provide an extra audio track, right? They're going to give you some headphones, and it'll be an extra audio track that you can have on top of the movie, so that you can get that visual information that is spoken to you. So we've talked about audio description, why it's important. And this is the logo. Let me zoom in a little bit on that, because I think it might be kind of small. So that's the logo for audio description, right? Where it's captions, right? Usually we have closed captions, and it's the little CC in a box. So AD with some lines, curved lines next to it. That is the little symbol that we're going to see for audio description available. And again, it's just extra audio that is optionally added to the video, usually on a separate track that you can enable or disable as needed, that is going to talk and tell you any visual information that is presented in the video. So if you think about, for example, watching a news report, right? And the little thing comes up on the bottom of the screen to tell you who's speaking, right? Well, if you can't see the screen, how do you know who's speaking? So that's something that would be included in audio description to say like, oh, this is so-and-so, and they're, they live in this apartment building that we're talking about in this news report, for example. All right, so audio description. So it is WCAG 1.2.5, audio description for pre-recorded. But obviously, audio description would be very challenging to provide for a live broadcast, but we can provide them for pre-recorded media. So another alternative, if you're making videos, to providing an audio description is to just ensure that as you're recording the video, like if you're recording like a tutorial on how to do something for YouTube, you can just make sure that as you go through that video, that anything that is visual on the screen, that you're saying it as part, just as part of your text, like, oh, and then there's this button that says this, and I'm going to click it. For example, instead of just saying like, oh, and then I'll click here, and then I'll click here, right? That's not super helpful for people who can't see what you're doing. But to actually reiterate that just in the audio, and then you actually don't need to have the separate audio description track because you're not leaving anything out. You're not leaving out any of that visual information. You've already included it. And then we have a couple of other resources that they'll link us to. All right, so we'll spend the rest of the time on forms, which are trickier and I think more complicated or more complex, I think, to implement correctly than a lot of people might realize. So looks like we've got two main areas that we're focused on here, which is the labels and then the required fields. And I'll talk a little bit about some other things that might come up as well. So when we're testing a form, we want to make sure that a form is accessible. We want to make sure that there is a visible label for every field in the form. An always visible label. So not a placeholder in the field that's going to disappear as soon as I start typing, right? But something that is visible all the time. And so this is a good example. I have username. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. It feels kind of small. So here I have just username, password, right? Like a standard login form, and a little forgot password link at the bottom. So visually, this looks correct. Of course, we have to look at how this got marked up in the HTML to make sure that it's all done correctly and that those labels are not just visually next to the inputs, but actually programmatically associated with them. So I'm guessing that they are going to show us how to check this. All right, so they have to be visible there, like I said, next to the form field. Typically, for most types of form fields, you want the label to either be to the left of or on top of for a left to right language like English, right? We would want the label to either be to the left of the input or on top of the input, unless it is a checkbox or a radio button, and then we usually put it to the right, right? So you'd usually have the checkbox first and then the text to the right of it. So it flips for checkboxes and radio buttons. All right, so they give us a little bookmarklet. So let's go ahead and run that. And it's going to identify some issues that we have here. So we have a label for a field with an ID of name. And we see this little labeled check appear next to our name input. So we know the name label is not just displayed next to the input, but it is actually programmatically tied to that input. So it's all set. That is not true for the next thing here. So if I close this out, these two look identical, right? So name field, role field, they look exactly the same, but the way that they're marked up is different so that the name field is correctly marked up and that label is programmatically tied to the form field. Role is not. And so we can see that that role field says it is missing a label. And then for the checkboxes, again, they all look identical. Visually, they look correct. We have a checkbox to the right of it. We have the label for the checkbox. It all looks right. But when we run this little bookmarklet, we can see that the first one is missing its label. So this word roses, it is not programmatically tied back to that checkbox. So that is going to be a problem. And then it looks like these are both labeled, and they're maybe labeled in two different ways. So we have two ways of programmatically tying text, label text to an input, either implicit or explicit. And I'm going to guess that we're going to see exactly what those look like a little bit further down the page. I will tell you a quick cheat for checking to see if a form field label is actually programmatically associated with it is to use your mouse and click on the form field, and that should focus on the label. Click on the label with your mouse, and that should focus the text input or the checkbox or whatever it is should get focused. If it doesn't, like when I click on roll, nothing happens. That's a sign that it's not correctly coded. So I know roses here was incorrectly coded, right? Nothing happens when I click on the word roses. When I click on poppy, it actually focuses and actually checks and unchecks the box. And the same thing for this other one. But you can see roses is broken. I have to click directly on that checkbox if I want to be able to check it. So for checkboxes and radio buttons, having that label actually be correctly associated helps in another way too, in that it gives us a bigger target for clicking to check or uncheck the radio button or checkbox, right? Because you can see on roses, I've got to check somewhere within this little white box if I want to check this box. But on poppy, I can check over here, I can check over here, I can check on the box, I can check the E, I can check the H, right? And it all works. So I have a much bigger area. So for somebody who has, fine motor control issues or dexterity issues, it's going to be way easier to check the correct form fields. So just like the other ones, we can go ahead and grab that and put it on our bar. And I don't remember if we've talked about this recently, but bookmarklets is what these are called. They are just little bits of JavaScript that run on your screen. And you can see here it is. We can see exactly what the code is if you can read JavaScript. Then you could pull it, probably not in this format, but you could probably copy and paste that into a text editor and figure out what it's doing. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And the big drawback for me with bookmarks or bookmarklets rather is that once you have bookmarked them, because you're just bookmarking JavaScript, there's no way to know where you got that bookmarklet from later. So if I, 2 weeks from now, I run into my friend and they're like, oh, I'm testing this form. And I'm like, oh, I've got this awesome bookmarklet that checks your form fields. Well, I don't know where to tell her to go get it because I don't remember where I got it from. So I do recommend using like tags or keywords or whatever your browser makes available to you to just put a little quick note for yourself. There we go. I already had it in there. So that you know where that came from. And you could go ahead and go back and find it later if you needed to. Also, be careful with bookmarklets. Make sure you're getting them from a reputable source because JavaScript, that JavaScript in a bookmarklet, it could do anything that JavaScript can do on your page, which means that it could potentially do something nefarious. So make sure that you're getting bookmarklets from a reputable source. Of course, the WAI is a perfectly reputable source. I have no concerns about getting a bookmarklet from them. All right. Well, I was kind of hoping that they were going to show me I was hoping they were going to show some code examples, but that's okay. We'll just use the code examples that they made available for us. And we'll just look in here in the browser. So here's my first one. So you can see that I have a label tag and it has a 4 attribute set to name. And then I'm going to guess that in this span, let's see. Wait, I don't think I have the bookmarklet running right now. No, I sure don't. Okay. Okay, there's my input, finally. You can see it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how far away it is from my label, like programmatically. As long as this ID matches this for attribute, then everything is good. And those are going to be programmatically associated with one another. And this is an explicit. So I mentioned that we have two ways of doing it, explicit and implicit. This is explicit. So explicit, we use the for attribute on the label to tie it to the ID of the form field. So role, you can see that's not a label tag. It's just a span, right? It's no good. So visually, I can tell that there is a label for that form field, but programmatically, there's no label. So let's take a look at these checkboxes because I'm pretty sure that, that they have shown both implicit and explicit here. So here I have my label for roses, but you see it doesn't have a for attribute. So if you remember, roses is not correctly associated with its, I don't know why all these are wrapped so many levels deep, but anyway, so there is an ID on, oh wait, am I on the wrong one? Oh yeah, I am. Where's the checkbox? Oh, here's the checkbox for roses. Okay. So there's my checkbox for rose. It does have an ID on it, so we would just need to add a for set to rose to get that to work correctly. All right, so there's my roses, and then I have my poppy. And here's my label for poppy and the input of ID poppy. So that's another explicit one. And then I have a feeling this one is going to be implicit. Yes. So this is how we do implicit association. So we basically just wrap the label around the field input. This works really well for checkboxes and radio buttons. It can be a little bit limiting to use for like text inputs and text areas and select boxes and things like that because it gives you a lot less options for layout with CSS. And also, apparently, I just learned this recently, sometimes it doesn't work as reliably as you might expect. So you might run into some issues. So definitely favor the explicit programmatic association between a form and its label. All right, so Alan has a question on thoughts on setting the label to cursor pointer. Yes, that is, I'm going to say, a personal preference. At this point, I don't know that there's any specific guidance one way or another. You can see that by default, form fields do not get a pointer cursor. And there was a big trend for a long time of everybody switching it to a pointer cursor in their CSS. So almost every site has form fields switched to a pointer cursor, which is fine. I think originally the pointer cursor was meant to signify a link, but I think people like to have it signify interactivity in general. I don't think that it's an accessibility concern either way. There's probably some user experience things to think about there, but I wouldn't say like, yes, always do it or no, never do it. It depends. Like almost everything in web development, right? The correct answer is it depends. So if you like doing it, do it. If you don't like doing it, don't. Be consistent across the site, I would say, right? Like don't do it on some pages and not on others. Be consistent about it. And then Ellen had a pretty good tip too. Like if you aren't sure, you come across a bookmarklet and it looks useful, but you can't read JavaScript or you're just not sure what it does, you could just give that to AI and ask the AI, like, hey, what does this code do? Is this safe to use? And I would imagine you get a pretty reliable answer back from that. AI that's something AI should be pretty good at, right? It's got blind spots, but that's something it should be reasonably good at. All right. So the one thing that they didn't talk about in this article, so this is WCAG 3.3.2, labels are instructions. And I think that the one thing that they kind of left out that I wish was included was when we have additional text, like extra instructions that we want for a field. So if we go back up to the top, let me zoom back in. I think this is like a screenshot of a login form instead of it being like a login form. Yeah, it is. Okay. So if we were creating an account, for example, and we had some rules around the password, right? And we wanted to let the users know your password's got to be at least 12 characters long, and it has to include a letter, and at least one letter, one number, and one symbol. So typically how you see that presented is kind of where we have this forgot password link presented, like kind of right under the password input, right? Is typically you'd see some text here saying that, right? Like here are the rules for creating your password. And this is something that gets overlooked a lot by developers, is that text also needs to be programmatically tied to the input, the same as the label does. And the best tool that we have for doing that right now is to use an ARIA described by attribute on the label, or on the form input, sorry. So on the form input, I would want to have ARIA described by and have that point to an ID of this text down here. So this text would have like an ID of like password instructions or whatever. And then my actual form input would have ARIA described by password instructions. You can pass multiple IDs, just space separated, to ARIA described by. So if you have multiple things that are giving information on a form field, you can concatenate them in that field. That is also a way that you can associate error messages. So if I tried to submit this form, but I left the password blank, and then I want to show an error message that says, hey, password is required, you have to fill it in. We could also use ARIA described by for that case as well, to make sure that that error message gets programmatically associated back with that form field. There is a newer ARIA attribute that I think is called ARIA error that will replace described by for that purpose, for programmatically tying an error message to a form field, but is not widely supported yet. So don't rely on that one just yet, but keep an eye on it, because that's super handy to have like an official way of tying an error message to a form field. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. All right. So, oh, I see, I switched tabs. Okay. All right, so that is our form field labels, and then also how to programmatically tie extra instructions or error messages back to your form fields. So let's go ahead and take a look at our last section, which is on required fields. So for a really long time on the web, it was pretty common to do things like this, to just have a little asterisk. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. So we see a label, this is first name, and there's a little tiny red asterisk next to it, right? And that's how we would know which fields were required. But of course, that doesn't really get announced to screen reader users. So there has been a movement to actually use the word required in the form field label, but we can also programmatically mark a form field as required. So we have a required attribute, and I wonder if they are going to show that to us. Let's see. Doesn't look like it. This is also 332, labels or instructions. Let me inspect this instruction and see what they've done here. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, so they have used the required attribute. So we can put that required attribute on things also to programmatically mark them as required. So we have kind of two different audiences that we're concerned about, right? Like first, people who can see the form need to be able to visually see which fields are required. So it's nice to have some kind of visual indicator on there. Of course, it cannot be color alone. So that's another WCAG success criteria. You can use color, but you can't use color alone, right? So if I want to say required fields are highlighted in red, like maybe they have the border around the field is red, that's fine, but you have to have another way also of saying which fields are required, whether that's your asterisk or the word required or a little icon of some kind next to them. So some visual indication of that required state. And then you also need a programmatic indication of that required state. And the easiest way to do that is to use this required attribute. Now, I know that this recommendation here to actually use the word required came along, but I know that it personally kind of irritates some screen reader users, because basically what that results in is that if you have the word required in the label, and then you also have the required attribute set on the form field, they hear the required read twice, right? Because it will say first name required, field is required. Like, yeah, I got it. I got to fill in this form, right? I have to fill in this field. So keep that in mind. There's not really like a hard and fast, like always do this, never do this rule. Like, again, it's going to be, it depends on what works best for you. You do have to keep in mind that if you want to do something like using the asterisk for required fields, that it is a pretty well-established convention across the web. So most people will probably have encountered it before, but it does require some extra cognitive processing, right? This extra cognitive load to associate a symbol back to a meaning that's separate, that's listed somewhere else on the page. You would definitely want to have text that says required fields are marked with an asterisk and not just mark them with an asterisk. So you want to actually have like a little key, right, that explains what that symbol means. And here we say it just says required fields are labeled. So as long as you have some way of visually telling which fields are required for everybody who's not using a screen reader or assistive technology, who needs to be able to tell which fields they actually have to fill in, and you have a programmatic way of saying which fields are required so that people know what they have to fill in, then you're all set. And exactly what that looks like might be different from site to site, from situation to situation, because it also is going to depend on your particular audience and who's using what you're building, right, and what their personal preferences are. So keep that in mind. You need both a visual way and a programmatic way of saying that a field is required so that it's obvious. And generally on the web, like, it's not done very well. And I will tell you what my personal trick is when I'm faced with like a big, huge form that I have to fill in on a website and the required fields are not obvious. I'll just like go to the submit button and hit it on a blank form to see what it tells me is actually required. And then I know like, oh, I can just fill in those fields. So you can copy me if you want and just do that, like a quick way. I just need to know which fields are required. I don't have time for this. Just try to submit the form and you can immediately see which fields are required. So another thing to keep in mind with required fields or with any kind of error message, whether, somebody typed their email address and forgot the @ symbol, or, they put in only 2 digits for a phone number, right? If you're doing any kind of validation like that or required fields, you're going to have some kind of error message that happens when users don't do what they were supposed to, right? And you need to make sure that that error message is also programmatically explained to users. So you have a couple of different things that you can do. One is like what I mentioned earlier, where you're going to use ARIA described by to tie your error message to your form field. A nice thing that you can do when somebody tries to submit the form then is move focus back to the form field that has a problem. If there's multiple fields that have a problem, move focus back to the first one that has a problem, because then what will happen is, because this focus moved back to that form field, the screen reader will read out the label and the ARIA described by, and they'll understand like, oh, the form didn't submit because I didn't submit something. Another option that you have is to put a summary of the errors at the top of the form, right? So a little box at the top of the form that says, oh, password is required and your phone number isn't formatted correctly and your email address is incorrect. And then to have each of those items like in a bulleted list that when you click or activate them, they jump you to that associated form field. So, and then when you try to submit the form, you move focus up to that box so that it's really easy to understand that there was a problem and how to fix it. So that's a really important WCAG success criteria, is that things are going to go wrong. People are going to fill out your form wrong. And how do you handle that? And how do you make it clear to them what went wrong and how to fix it so that they can understand exactly how to manage that situation and to successfully submit the form? All right, so a couple of things. I went over a couple of things that were left out actually of the Easy Checks. So that's what I meant when I said forms are, I think, more complex and there's more layers there than a lot of people realize. But if you keep all of those things in mind and make sure that extra instructions and error messages as well as labels are all programmatically tied back to the fields, it goes a long way. And then another thing that I didn't see mentioned in here is that if you have, let's go back to the other one. If you have a set of checkboxes like this, or a set of radio buttons, right? You don't want to use a heading, right? Like an H1, H2, H3, etc., followed by the checkboxes. What you actually want to use is a field set with a legend. And let's take a look and see if they did it correctly. I suspect that they probably did. Yeah, so this is what that looks like. So you wrap the whole set of things in a field set. The legend has to be the first child of the field set. So if you're doing some kind of fancy CSS and you need a div in there, you can put a div inside the field set. It just has to go after the legend, right? So that the legend isn't inside that div. The legend absolutely has to be the first child of a field set. So this is what you would do instead of, whoops, I didn't need to switch. That's what I wanted to do. Instead of this being a heading followed by these options, it would be a legend followed by those options. And yes, field sets and legends have some kind of odd CSS out of the box. It's really easy to overwrite and style those to look however you want. And the advantage that those have is that screen readers and other assistive technology can be put into a forms mode. And when they are in forms mode, they only read out forms things. So if you have a heading here instead of a legend of a field set, it won't get read out. If you have extra instructions under a password field, but it's just a paragraph and it's not programmatically tied, it doesn't get read out in forms mode. So that's why using these things is really important, because people are flipping into an alternate mode of their assistive technology to help them fill out that form efficiently. But then if you haven't set up your form correctly, you're cutting them off from information that everybody else has. All right, so that is all that we'll do today. We'll go ahead and wrap up. I actually have another meeting to head to right away. So thank you for joining me today. Because the next live stream would be scheduled for New Year's Eve, we are going to skip it. And so I will see you all back here on January 14th. We're going to do some accessibility quick wins for the new year. So if you're looking for a handful of things you could implement on your website right away in January, start the year off right, make your website a little bit more accessible, we're going to go through a small list of those things on January 14th. So I will see you then. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope, again, that you are having a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much.